Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's meeting of Rochester Xamarin. Today is January 13th, 2021. It's our first session of the year. Before we get started, I always thank our sponsors. The .NET Foundation gives us the online account for meetup.com so everyone can find this online. And my company, File on Q, sponsors the online meeting tool so we can all do this remotely. Today, the featured presenter is myself. If you don't know me, I'm Andrew Hoefling. I couldn't get anyone to volunteer for the beginning of the year, so decided to take on today's session with conversational UIs for data sync. And we will talk a little bit about that once I switch my slide decks over. And let me get the right screen share going. All right. That should be drawing. Okay, so I want to talk about data sync, conversational UIs, and things that you can do with your Xamarin.Forms app to make it a little bit more human when it's interacting with your users. Before we get into that, I just wanted to let everyone know who I am. I'm a lead software engineer at File on Q. We build barcode scanning apps and products. I build the mobile apps for us. I do a lot of open source development. I'm always active in the community with my blog, Twitter, you name it. You can probably find me on the internet. Enough about me. Let's talk a little bit about what I want to go over today. So I want to go over at a high level what you need to do for offline data and mobile apps. The focus of this talk isn't really managing your SQLite databases. It's more about the UI, but it's still important to understand some of the concepts that go into uh, offline data and mobile apps. I want to go over what this concept of conversational UIs. This is not necessarily a textbook definition we're going to go over. It's my take on it. So take some of that with a grain of salt. And I want to talk about how we could implement some of these concepts with very lean view models in an MVVM application and all of that. So let's talk a little bit about mobile apps and offline data. So when you build a mobile app, if you come from a web background like I did, when I first got into mobile application development, I thought, well, it's just like a web server. So I can just communicate to my databases, I can communicate to my other services I need to, and everything will be good. But it's really not that simple. Because let me see the next slide. Yes, next slide is good. So this is my quick and dirty drawing that I did last night to kind of convey the concepts. So when you're building a mobile app, the way I describe it to people when you're dealing with offline data is you have your own little app that needs to communicate with other apps or APIs. So I would consider, do you guys see my mouse? I hope you do. Well, so I'm circling over the Droid idea here. So if you consider that as your own API with its own database and needs to communicate somewhere else. So because if you don't have internet, you're not going to be able to go to your central server that has its own database. So you need to make sure that you write everything to the local database and you read everything from the local database. A common mistake that I see in offline application development is when you have internet, you'll read directly from whatever your API endpoint is and skip writing it to your local database until the last step. And I see that cause more headaches than it's worth. Of you should always be reading and writing to the database on your app, and then when it's time to present data to the screen, instead of having to jump over to the API here and then the database and back up, it's all right there on disk, and you can quickly present it to the user. So this concept is a little bit different from if you're building web apps, because you don't usually have a database stored on device because their access, because in mobile space we have to deal with internet connectivity. So this is just kind of a diagram to outline the basic idea of what databases you're dealing with in an offline app in the mobile space. So when you start talking about data synchronization, some of the concepts that I've come across is you have your background sync where the user never really knows what's going on as far as are you online, are you offline. I once believe, and it depends, and I'm going to use that it depends that we like to use as developers all the time. Depends if that's the best approach. It really depends on what um, what your business rules and use cases are. So you got your background sync. So the user really never knows if the data is syncing. You might have like a push notification or whenever your device has internet connectivity, it'll send and upload. It'll send data to your device, and your data will send device back to the server to make sure everything's in sync. A foreground sync might be something that displays on the UI to make it really apparent to the user that it's time to do a sync. This happens a lot in line of business applications where it's okay to display the type of data. And then combination is you might want to do some stuff in the background, you might want to do some stuff in the foreground. And then I I was using this word conversational sync earlier this week, and good time to remind everyone. I put this slide deck together in the past couple days in this presentation based on some techniques I was leveraging for some data sync that I was writing in a mobile app that I wanted to share with people. So conversational sync is trying to implement a conversational UI. Is my next slide? Yeah. So we'll get into what conversational UI is in a second. It's kind of a combination well, it's not a combination. The when I use conversational sync, it's a foreground sync, but it's using state management on the UI to make it a little bit easier for the user to understand as it progresses through a connecting, downloading, upload, and success workflow of states. So when I was starting to put together a slide deck, I came across this definition of conversational UI, and the idea is it's creating a user interface to make the interactions with whatever app or device that you're working on a little bit more human, like a conversation. Some of the stuff that we're going to go over in my code demo might not be fully to the point of conversational UIs, but it can be expanded upon that. And let's see what my next slide. So yeah, so here's some screenshots of what we're going to be going over in the code demo in just a little bit. So I created a really basic Xamarin.Forms app, and we're deploying it out to Android. And when I hit the Start Sync button, it's going to go through a series of workflows. This is just the first state and the last state, and the UI updates as you go along. Instead of having it happen in the background, we wanted to push this all the way to the front. Where is this really important? If you're building like a social, I call them social apps, so something that's used by a general user, you might not want to have your syncs this far in the foreground. You might want that to be really pushed to the background so they don't see it. I find this very useful for line of business style applications. So the product that I work on, we have people scanning barcodes in an inventory management system. So consider large warehouses of stuff, and as they move stuff around, they scan and move it around. The challenge is in these warehouses, there's no cell service, there's no Wi-Fi service, so these devices work 100% offline, and they're only able to sync when you hook them back up to a computer. So in my case, it's very important to communicate to the user what's happening, and that's kind of where all of this session came from, of how we're handling our syncs. So before we go into some of the code stuff, yeah, so some things that you could do to start that conversation inside of a mobile app is you can check for network status, and if the network status is changed, easy enough to start that process. Again, in our sample app, we just have a start sync button. And the app that I've been building, we have these big it's customized hardware that we're working with, and we have these cradles that the devices dock into. And the second we put the device inside the cradle, we start the sync process and we check for internet connection at that point. So we create the conversation of, instead of user tapping a button, they put the device on the cradle and this page loads up, and it starts kicking off the sync process at that point, and communicates to them every step of the way of what's happening. We're connecting, we're downloading, we're uploading, and then we're done, or we failed and they have to try again. So let's talk a little bit about the code problem here with a page like this. So going back to my screenshots, I said we got a connecting state, a downloading state, an uploading state, and a success state. That's 4 states. If you count failure, that's 5. And if you count unknown, you got 6. We're really going to be focused on our 4 states here. So well, if you can imagine in an MVVM architecture, each thing on this page, so you got a title, you might have a header underneath, you got a message, and you got some icons. Those all need to be bindable properties as your status changes. And managing that can get very messy very quickly. And that's one of the things that I noticed the first time I went to go and implement this last year, was whenever the state changes, I got to go update all these other properties, and it just became this big mess that I didn't want to deal with. And it's the first problem that I noticed when you try making rich user interfaces. It can be very difficult on how you manage that state in view models. There's different techniques out there, especially in the latest and greatest bits of Xamarin.Forms and other UI technologies with visual state managers. There's all sorts of cool things that we could do, but there's also, we can always go back to the basic with our MVVM architecture and find a better way to do it. But getting back to the problem I want to describe, with these complex view models, they're really hard to maintain. And one of the problems we ran into is we constantly had new bugs. We needed to make some change to how this workflow was working, or messaging, or maybe there's a really weird state that it got into because we failed to connect to our server and we wanted to display that type of information to a user. Well, now we needed to update our status, which is good. So other parts of the application know what the sync status is, but now we need to update our title, update our message, update our icons. And we were just running in circles trying to get this stuff to work right. So the solution I came up with was actually just this week, is let's create lean view models. If you go back to the basics of MVVM architecture, the idea is only have properties on those view models that are important for the business rules. It's a common trap. I fall into this all the time of, oh, I got this status, or in our case here, let's just go and create properties for title, message, or let's go create additional properties that aren't really specific to the view model, but they're useful for the binding on the view for the different data I want to present. And it's not always a trap. Sometimes it's just the easier way to do it, and it can be faster, but than an I-value converter. But in my case here, since I was managing so much state in the view model, it made a lot more sense to have everything bind to our status and then use a value converter to make the updates on the UI. So I kind of talked about that. The idea with the lean view model is, again, we have all of these states. Instead of having a property for each different control on the screen that I want to update, we manage that completely in the UI with the converter. So the only thing the view model does is manage state and process any type of data synchronization workflow, which is all it should do. And we get to the code demo, I'll show you the big difference between the two. And it's I was talking to one of my friends that's really big into reactive programming earlier today, and it clicked in my head that the solution that we're going to go over is more reactive style programming. So let's talk a little bit about the I-value converter. If you've ever done a data template selector for like a list view, collection view, carousel view, the concept's very similar. So in a data template selector, you might have a couple different data templates that you have pre-programmed with your XAML or what have you, and the selector goes through and picks the correct one. Well, we're not dealing with data templates, so we're using an I-value converter, and the idea is we'll bind on our status object, and depending on which state that object that enum is in, we could pick from any type of object that we've bound to this converter. So instead of updating those bindable properties inside of your view model, we're mapping it to a static resource in this value converter. And then towards the end, we'll go over bindable objects for our value converter. So one of the things that this app that I'm working on, I wanted to make sure it supported translations. And if you're keeping up to date with the Xamarin Community Toolkit, they support localization with a special markup extension called Translate. And the problem I ran into was that actually uses a bindable property in the implementation details. So I wasn't able to use just a standard I-value converter. I needed my I-value converter to inherit from bindable objects so I could properly update all those properties. But that's at the end of the demo, and we'll go over that because that throws a couple wrenches into the problem. So let's go into our code demo here, and just check real quick in the chat. Is there any questions? Nope. All right. If there are questions, I'm only on one screen today. If you could just open your mic and let me know as we go. This can be very interactive since there's not a whole lot of us in the room here. Okay. So I have this project that I created called Data Sync Example. And I have all the code already written. So we're just going to go and run stuff and look through stuff. So this is just your standard Xamarin.Forms application. Let me just make sure we're loading the right page. Okay. So I created this. So let's go and take a look at our application setup here. This is a standard MVVM, or at least how I do MVVM applications. I got a views folder, I got a view models folder, and a models folder. You can ignore everything else for now. We talked about our sync status, and we got unknown, connecting, downloading, uploading, success, failure. There, 6. Before I go any further, do I need to increase the font here, or is this an okay size for people? I will take.
If you can increase a little bit.
A little bit, no problem. How about that? Is that good?
Thank you.
All right, cool. Okay, so we got our sync status here. Like I said, these standard status. Our view here, which one are we doing first? We're doing the everything. I call it everything because this is your kitchen sink, standard traditional way I used to do stuff. It's got the everything. So let's take a look at what's going on in here. Yeah, we have a title at the top. So that's bound to property. We have our header, which is just, it's got my name printed underneath it. We display that image in the middle. And then we have a message and a button at the bottom. Everything's bound to the view model. So let's hit the go button and take a look what this actually looks like. Oh, is it yelling at me again? Of course. It's always got to yell at me during a demo. Let's just close that. Start it over. Every time I resize my my emulator, it's been giving me problems, but I'll give it a second to boot up. And give it a second. But while that is loading, let's go and take a look at our main view model that maps this, everything. Okay. So we have our command right here to start from the screenshot earlier. There's a button at the bottom to start the job off. But your standard iNotify properties that you're going to bind to your view. So we have a title, we have a header, we have a message, and we have an icon. This is kind of dirty. I don't like this, but and you'll see how we solve this problem. But why is that not loading? It says it succeeded. Don't make me go over to Visual Studio. I've been having so much fun over here. Sorry that I'm having emulator problems. This was just working before we started the screen share. Let me close that and try doing a cold boot. See if that fixes the problem. If that doesn't work, I got some physical devices I can connect to the machine here. That looks better, right? I have no idea. Oh, there we go. Let's go back to make that nice and big for everyone. All right, cool. So this is the data sync app. So now we actually got something to look at. We got a button at the bottom, we got a title at the top. And this, when I hit the start button, it will go through and perform our sync. So let's start. We got a connecting screen. It simulates it. We have retrieving and uploading and a success screen. One of the things that at the very beginning, there was nothing here. And that's because state management's hard. And when I do that in my view model, I actually forgot to have a base state. So all of these properties are just set to empty string and null, and nothing's getting updated until we actually hit the go button here. So we scroll down a little bit. Let's take a look at what's happening on our OnStar async. Did I go back down in size? Yes, I did. I'm going to have to remember to increase that size every time. We'll make that. There we go. Okay. So I created these three methods down here to simulate data sync. So like I said at the beginning of the session here, I'm not really communicating with a SQLite database. That stuff's hard. We're going to do that in another session. So we decided to do some task delays and to simulate communication points. And so in our OnStar async, we we try connect, we try downloading, we try uploading, and at each step along the way, we update our status. So that's pretty standard for updating your enum and making sure that that gets published out to the UI. And then I have this update method. And this update method is where things start to go off the rails. So if we scroll down here, I have this switch statement that kind of goes through each state and updates the UI for us. And it gets really messy because I got to update the title, the header, the message, and if there's a special gotcha case in the downloading, let's say, well, now this starts blowing up and getting a lot more complicated very quickly on just managing too much in our view model. Another problem here is if we go back to our view, looking at our image here, this just takes your standard image source. We're binding it right over. So if we flip back to our view model, it becomes a little difficult on our view model should be decoupled from Xamarin.Forms. That's kind of a golden rule I try to follow. Whenever I write my view model code, I shouldn't have using Xamarin.Forms, but we have to because we want to bind a font image source. So maybe I can create a string and a converter to update that, but that's going to get messy in a different way. But to do the view model technique here with everything together, state management becomes a mess. And then I'm using a material font that I loaded, and I put a special key in my my root app XAML file is called material icons, and it's able to grab that material icons font and grab it, and then I can map to the necessary glyphs. But I need, since that's different for the different platforms, I need to cast that to an on-platform string and then apply it to font family. And this whole mess is just, it shouldn't be here in the view model, and makes our code very brittle. All this makes our code very brittle. But it works. And this was what we're using in production right now. Not this exact code, but the same technique. Something that we're moving away from, but it does the job. So let's look at how we can make this a little bit better. So I have this main page basic here, and let's go to our main view model. We're going to come back to the basic page in just a second. So this one, I don't have title, I don't have message, I don't have icon, it just has status, and it just has my start command. That's it. We scroll down to the bottom of this file, 56 lines of code. The other one, I believe, was close to 200, almost 200 lines of code. So we're about 25% less code, which means we're going to have less errors here. All we do is we remove that update method. So looking at our onStart async, we just say, I want to update my status. Let's go to the next step. Update my status. Go to the next step. Update my status. Go to the next step. Excuse me. And our status is just pushing those events to the UI. So let's look at what our UI will look like for this. We'll come back to this page. I need to go to the converters. Forgot about that. Okay. So I created these special converters called sync status converters. I called it basic because we're going to have a more advanced version of it that we're going to go over in just a sec. So for each state that we could be syncing, I just apply the string that I want it to be. So we got connecting, retrieving data, uploading, success, failure. I'm updating my title, my header, and my message. Everything else is staying the same. So this is just acting exactly like a data template selector, but we're using a converter. So we say, these are the values that I want to map in these states. So let's take a look at what that converter looks like. So we got our 5 states that we care about. And when we go to convert, we just cast our value to our sync status, and then we run it through a switch statement and say, return connecting, return downloading, return uploading, return success. If it's not one of those, it's a failure. So instead of having that spaghetti mess inside of our main view model over here, and I forgot to make this a little bit bigger. There we go. So instead of having this mess of applying all these properties, we just run through the switch statement and say, grab the object. We're just going to assume that whoever created this converter applied the correct properties. So something that's a little different from how I've done stuff in the past with converters is, instead of declaring all of these converters in a global app XAML file, you're gonna create them for each page you want to use them on. And that way, I created a title converter and a header converter, and I created an icon converter, and I created a message converter. So everything can get updated based off that status. So scrolling down, for our title, we bound that to status, and we apply the title converter. Going down one more line, the header, we bound that to status, and we apply that to the header converter. Going down for our icon, it's bound to status. The message, it's bound to status. Everything's bound to status, and we just use the converter that we have applied those strings for. So now we're moving a little bit closer to a reactive style programming, because these converters are reacting based off of the status change as it moves through the workflow, and then it prints the correct information to the screen because we've configured all that at the top of the page here. So let's take a look at what this actually looks like when we run it. So I'm going to comment out this one and open up my region. Just wanted to hide those. So you don't see them as we get through, as we move through stuff. Okay, so let's go back to our XAML file here. And while that opens up, I'm just going to check for any questions. No questions. All right. Okay, so right when the app starts, we have status because we got those converters in place. We already have a status, even though we didn't run anything in the view model yet. It has the status has a value. Right now, that's failure because we haven't done a sync. So it shows up on screen. When I did the first one with the main view model underscore everything, there was no status that printed to the screen. So already I find this less error prone because it's able to capture that status and update it to the screen correctly. So if I go and hit start sync now, it's going to go through the exact same workflow that we saw earlier. And finally it finishes up as success. And I'll even drop my breakpoint in here, not there. This is not the one we're using. We're using the main view model. I'll even drop my breakpoint in here and hit start again. And we just hit that breakpoint. We'll stop it here. So we're going through and we're just updating the status, and it's all being handled by the converter. And as I've been saying, this is going to be a less error-prone solution. So let's take a look at that converter now. And we'll stop the debugger. Okay. So we could bind anything here. We're binding an image source in down here. So whatever we want to set, and what I'm doing in this this icon converter is I'm using the font image markup extension that and just grabbing the correct information to display those different icons. So let's take this a step further. So these are the big concepts we got so far. We got our converter. We've configured our converters, and we've updated them onto the page. So now everything is rendering correctly. So let's take this one step further. In the app that I'm building, I want it to be localized. The Xamarin Community Toolkit has a really great API for localization. So what I did is I went ahead and created these resource files. So let's open up my localization manager. So I have updated my my message and my title for English and Spanish. I don't know if those translations are correctly. I literally just plugged them into Bing Translate and hope for the best. I am not bilingual. It's a dream one day. So let's go and see how this works. I'm going to go and uncomment my third solution here. Oops, that is a comment. That is not code. So for the translation stuff, this is the 25 and 26 are just Xamarin Community Toolkit stuff to initialize the translations. Right now, I got it set to use Spanish, and it's going to go to main page. So we did everything. We've done basic. Now we're on the main page. So let's look at this. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So everything is still the same, more or less. Everything's binding to status and using the different converters. But the converters have changed now. Instead of hard coding the actual value inside of the different objects here, I'm using this markup extension that's available in the Xamarin Community Toolkit called Translate. And what that does is it looks in that resource file I just showed you and looks for this property name and then grabs the appropriate translation for that. So when I went to go and do this with my original implementation, this didn't work because in the implementation of that translate markup extension, it's actually doing a bindable property. That way you can swap your translations on the fly if you want to go from English to Spanish to French to Chinese. You can just do that without restarting the app. And things weren't working. But when I looked at my converter, I saw this is just implementing an interface. Everything in Xamarin.Forms inherits from bindable objects. Not everything. Many things inherit from bindable object. And that's how we can create bindable properties. But what if we inherit from a bindable object? What will that do? So I went ahead and did that. Let's make that nice and big. So we got our sync status converter. It's got a parent class of bindable object, and it still inherits from my value converter because we can do that. And we got all of our same properties here: connecting, downloading, uploading, success, failure. But I went ahead and created bindable properties for each. So this is just your standard bindable property. We specify the name, we specify our object, which is just type of object, and we specify the declaring class. And now we could set our bindable objects because we're using the get value and set value methods that are available on the bindable object class. Scrolling down, our convert is exactly the same. So what this file is it's a bindable object that's also a converter. So looking back at our main page, since the translate API or markup extension requires a bindable object, we can now have the localization manager bind to our success title, our downloading title, and update it based on the languages. So looking back at our appxaml.cs, we're going to do Spanish. So let's run our application. And once it loads up, it's showing us Spanish instead it's localized to Spanish. And again, I don't know if these are I plugged them into Bing Translate. Hope for the best. Got my fingers crossed. But I hit start. It's going to go through the different states. Our icons are still the same because those don't need to be localized. But the messaging is all in another language and easy enough to switch. We stop our app. Change this to N for English. We'll load our app back up. And now we're back to English. If I didn't make that converter use bindable properties, the localization part was not working. So that was a big part to getting all of these different pieces work in my data sync UI. So, do I have anything else in my code? If you are interested in the code for this, let me open up a new window. I actually dropped this in the chat. I just published the code right before we started here. I'm going to drop a link to that in the chat. It's all on GitHub, all available. But that is, let's get my, that was the code demo. And I wanted to open it up if anyone has questions, if anyone wants to take a look at something I did. Fire away. No questions? Well, one thing I tell everyone at the end of any session that I do is there's a lot of concepts that I tend to go over in my talks, and I don't expect anyone to be able to take everything I just went over and be able to implement it tomorrow. But I hope everyone takes a little nugget of information back, whether it's the translation stuff with the Xamarin Community Toolkit or bindable objects, or maybe think about a different way to build your UIs. That's the important thing of being able to go home, go back to your team, research stuff that concepts I've gone over today. But if anyone's got questions, if not, we can go over to group time. So let me put my user group organizer hat back on. And let me share my screen again. All right, well, that is it for this month, Rochester Xamarin. We're about to go into group time where we turn the recording off. And as of right now, I don't have anyone lined up for February. So if you are interested in presenting, get a hold of me. Or you can find the @RockXamarin on Twitter and message me, and we can get you set up to present for February or later in the year. Until next time, thanks everyone for coming.